Welcome to Muswell Hill Baptist Church.
Blessed is the man that walketh not in the counsel of the ungodly, nor standeth in the way of sinners, nor sitteth in the seat of the scornful. His delight is in the law of the Lord, and in his law doth he meditate day and night. And he shall be like a tree planted by the rivers of water, that bringeth forth his fruit in his season. His leaf also shall not wither, and whatsoever he doeth shall prosper. The ungodly are not so, but are like the chaff which the wind driveth away. Therefore the ungodly shall not stand in the judgment, nor sinners in the congregation of the righteous. For the Lord knoweth the way of the righteous, but the way of the ungodly shall perish. Our Father, who art in heaven, hallowed be thy name. Thy kingdom come, thy will be done on earth as it is in heaven. Give us this day our daily bread, and forgive us our trespasses, as we forgive those who trespass against us. And lead us not into temptation, but deliver us from evil. For thine is the kingdom, the power and the glory, forever and ever. Amen.
Today we continue our journey with Abram, and we are looking at Genesis chapters 13 and 14, and some of the stories that are found in those chapters. Stories that help us to think about making faith choices. The first of the three stories we're going to look at is a story that only incidentally involves Abram, but is mostly about his nephew Lot. Abram and Lot had travelled, as it were, together into the unknown promised land that God had directed them to. There comes a point where their herdsmen and their families, if you like, their extended families, probably several hundred people each, are in dispute because they all want the best pasture. And that's where our reading comes in. This is Genesis chapter 13 from verse 8. Abram said to Lot, "Let's not have any quarrelling between you and me, or between your herdsmen and mine, for we are close relatives. Is not the whole land before you? Let's part company. If you go to the left, I'll go to the right. If you go to the right, I'll go to the left." Lot looked around and saw that the whole plain of the Jordan towards Zoar was well watered, like the garden of the Lord, like the land of Egypt. This was before the Lord destroyed Sodom and Gomorrah. So Lot chose for himself the whole plain of the Jordan and set out towards the east. The two men parted company. Abram lived in the land of Canaan, while Lot lived among the cities of the plain and pitched his tents near Sodom. So he could choose where to pitch his tents, but he chose to pitch his tents near Sodom, which was one of the cities of the plain. Sodom had a reputation for not being a very well-behaved place, but Lot could see the advantage of that area for his herdsmen, and that's where they pitched their tents. By chapter 14, Lot is living in Sodom. We read this in chapter 14 and verse 12. So the enemy took all the possessions of Sodom and Gomorrah and all their provisions and went their way. They also took Lot, the son of Abraham's brother, who was dwelling in Sodom, and his possessions, and went their way. So Lot pitched his tent by Sodom and ended up living in the city. We would call it a very small town, I imagine, of Sodom. Which brings us to the nature of choices. For Lot, it was the obvious choice. You remember that when he looked around, he saw that the best place to be for his herdsmen, for his families, was there on the plain near Sodom. Now, Sodom is not a place that you wanted to be near if you were a man of God. But he was willing to pitch his tents there for the sake of prosperity. Making faith choices. A very important faith choice is not to, as it were, pitch our tents with prosperity as our main object. If we pitch our tents near to what is evil, before long, what is evil will start to involve us, consume us, and change us. Earlier we read Psalm 1. Psalm 1 recognizes the need to think about where we are. Blessed is the man who walks not in the counsel of the wicked, nor stands in the way of sinners, nor sits in the seat of scoffers. We are going to be blessed if we think of where we pitch our tents and we prioritize the things of God's ways rather than that of worldliness. In chapter 14, to start with, there is a great battle. It's a battle between 4 kings and 5 kings. In the battle, the 4 kings won and the 5 kings lost. One of the 5 kings who lost was the king of Sodom. And that is where the verses we read earlier came in. Sodom was ransacked, and because Lot lived in Sodom, he and his family were taken captive and were part of the spoils of war. And that's where Abram came in. So Abram, finding that his nephew had been taken captive, went in pursuit. Now, he wasn't involved in that big battle, but now he was out to rescue his nephew. And with over 300 men of his own, they set out, and with God's help, presumably, they routed the enemy who had previously won. And by routing the enemy, they were able to set Lot free and bring him back. And of course, incidentally, get lots of stuff back for the kings who had previously lost. We read this, verse 16 of chapter 14 of Genesis. Then Abram brought back all the possessions, and also brought back his kinsman Lot with his possessions, and the women and the people. After his return from the defeat of Chedorlaomer and the kings who were with him, the king of Sodom went out to meet him at the King's Valley. So the king of Sodom, arrives, presumably to say thanks. And just as we're waiting to hear what the king of Sodom has to say, another king appears. In all of the Bible, this is one of the Bible's most interesting stories, and it remains something of a mystery. Well, perhaps more than something of a mystery. Let's read the story of the king who comes out to meet Abram. And Melchizedek, king of Salem, brought out bread and wine. He was priest of God Most High, and he blessed Abram and said, "Blessed be Abram by God Most High, possessor of heaven and earth. And blessed be God Most High, who has delivered your enemies into your hand." And Abram gave him a tenth of everything. It's a story that is referenced in the New Testament more than once. Because this king who appears is extraordinary for many reasons. First of all, he hasn't been involved in the battle, so what's he about? Secondly, he comes from Salem, which could be connected to Jerusalem, the city that was later to be the center of God's purposes. More fascinatingly, he comes with no history. He's never been in the story. We're waiting to hear what the king of Sodom has to say after his possessions have been recovered by Abram, and the king of Salem interrupts. The king of Salem brings a gift to Abram and his men. A gift of bread and wine, the two basic provisions in that time in what we would call the Middle East. The basic drink, wine, the basic food, bread. And he brings the gift as a priest of God Most High. Now, nearly every priest that you would have found in that part of the world at that time would have been anything but a priest of God Most High. He would have been a priest of many gods and particular kinds of gods, not the idea of one Most High God. And he's a king and a priest. Now, in the Bible, that's basically a no-no. The priests do the God thing, and the kings do the God thing practically by the way that they govern. And basically, the two are not supposed to cross over in any way. So when, in the Bible, kings do occasionally try to behave as priests, God, to put it mildly, slaps them down. In fact, in the Bible, if you left Melchizedek aside, there is only one priest who is also a king. Or to put it another way, there is only one king who is also a priest, and that is Jesus. This priest king has an extraordinary name, Melchizedek, King of Righteousness. The extraordinary thing in what happens in this story from Abram's point of view is that when this amazing, mysterious, out of nowhere King of Righteousness appears with bread and wine, Abram gives him a tenth of everything. In other words, he gives him devotion. He gives him what, as the Bible unfolds, is due to God, for he is a priest of the Most High God. Some have felt he was an appearance of Christ in the Old Testament, but strictly speaking, in the New Testament, he is drawn out as of the same order as Jesus Christ. Hebrews chapter 6, verse 19. We have this as a sure and steadfast anchor of the soul, a hope that enters into the inner place behind the curtain, where Jesus has gone as a forerunner on our behalf, having become a high priest forever, after the order of Melchizedek. For our purposes today, let's just grasp that the making of faith choices here for Abram is that when this King of righteousness from Salem comes, he by faith chooses to give him a tenth. From the winning of the spoils back, Abram immediately offers devotion via this priest of the Most High God. And when Jesus comes to us, the King of righteousness, who we meet in bread and wine at communion, we owe him devotion. And that does include our money, though first of all, it is the whole of our heart. Making faith choices. There's one more story, because we haven't finished with the king of Sodom yet. He hasn't spoken because of this amazing, mysterious interruption. And what happens when he does speak? Genesis 14:21. And the king of Sodom said to Abram, "Give me the captured people, but take the goods for yourself." But Abram said to the king of Sodom, "I have lifted my hand to the Lord God Most High, possessor of heaven and earth, that I would not take a thread or a sandal strap or anything that is yours, lest you should say, 'I have made Abram rich.'" What a contrast between Lot's attitude to Sodom and Abram's attitude to Sodom. Remember, Lot went there to get rich and pitched his tent nearby, ended up living there. Abram will not take the riches that Sodom offers him, because he has lifted his hand. That is to say, he has made his oath, his allegiance to the Most High God. And whatever else is true, Sodom and the Most High God are not, as history has shown, compatible. Anyone who has stood near the shores of the Dead Sea will just know that that is true, for Sodom is no more, and there is still to this day nothing in its place. Think of the contrast between what Abram did, for he gave of his money to the king of Salem, voluntarily as it were, a faith choice. But he would not take the money from the king of Sodom, another faith choice. In fact, of course, you see here that the king of Sodom immediately offers a way of getting the tenth back. So you could give your devotion to the priest of God Most High and sort of end the day with more money than you started with, as it were. But that's not making faith choices. That would be doing deals. Nothing wrong with deals if you're a business person, as long as you're honest in your dealings. But in the Bible, deals are not an entirely good thing. Eve did a deal with the devil in the garden in its opening chapters, and that deal has gone wrong for us all. Judas Iscariot did a deal with the religious leaders, and Jesus was betrayed and then crucified. You see, God isn't really about deals. He's about devotions. We don't do a deal with God. We give him everything, because God has given us everything first. This is the gospel of the Lord Jesus. Jesus did not come into the world to do a deal. He came into the world to give us new life. And we respond by receiving the gift that has been given and then by giving our devotion. It's not a deal, it's a response. What kind of faith choices are you making? Are you pitching your tent too close to what is evil? A bad faith choice. Are you giving your devotion to the King of righteousness, to the Most High God? A good faith choice. Are you turning your back on riches from the wrong place because you believe that God can provide you riches in the right way, from the right place? If so, you have learned the story of Genesis 13 and 14 and making faith choices.